I thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be standing before the House this evening to talk about a very, very important issue, an issue that is important not only to my constituents in eastern and southeastern Ohio, but to Americans across the nation. And the issue is the survival of the coal industry. Coal has provided America's energy engine for generations and can for many future generations if we but have policies out of this administration that reflect the value that the coal industry has meant to America and the future that it has in front of us. Coal is an abundant, affordable, and reliable form of energy. Coal, directly or indirectly, employs nearly 800,000 Americans and supplies approximately 40% of our nation's power generation. Coal mining employees across my district number in the thousands in eastern and southeastern Ohio. It also provides nearly 80% of Ohio's electricity, and it's the energy engine for Ohio's manufacturing industry, which so many of my constituents depend on for their livelihood. And I'm very proud to be joined tonight, Mr. Speaker, by some of my colleagues who are equally passionate about the coal industry and its value to America, both in the past and in the future. And at this point, I'd like to recognize my friend and colleague from the great state of Kentucky, the 6th District Representative Andy Barr.
I thank the gentleman, my friend from Ohio, for yielding and for organizing this special order on coal. This fall marks the 5th anniversary of the financial crisis. We remain burdened by a weak economic recovery, with unemployment still lingering above 7%. Two-thirds of the American people living paycheck to paycheck, and only 58% of the working-age population in this country employed. But this does not seem to concern this president or this administration. Unable to wage a war in Syria due to immense public opposition, the president, for some reason, seems intent on conducting a war on jobs. Whether it's driving up the cost of health care with the disastrous Affordable Care Act, or burdening community banks with mountains of bureaucratic red tape from the Dodd-Frank Act, this administration is seemingly intent on doing everything in its power to ensure this recovery remains slow and painful. The finalization of the new source performance standard rules from the EPA for greenhouse gas emissions this week will represent the latest and perhaps the most damaging barrage in this war on jobs. This regulatory carbon tax is the keystone of a radical environmental agenda, the disastrous results of which are already known in my district of central and eastern Kentucky. The consequences of these regulations have echoed throughout the hills of Appalachia, and they will reverberate across the country in years to come. The new source performance standards will finish the job that a deadlocked permitting process and multi-billion-dollar regulations like the Utility MACT have started, killing the coal industry and driving up the cost of energy, a top-line budget item for families already struggling to get by in this president's economy. But then no one should be surprised. This is the one promise the president made and has kept. When running in 2008, President Obama, then candidate Obama, said his policies would make the cost of electricity necessarily skyrocket. More recently, White House climate advisor Daniel Schrag recently admitted this administration's previously only thinly veiled position. Mr. Schrag said famously now, quote, A war on coal is exactly what is needed, unquote. Mr. Speaker, I can't think of another example of a presidential administration pledging to put hard-working Americans in a centuries-old industry totally out of work, apparently for the crime of providing low-cost energy that drives the engine of our economy. The damage of these policies is already clear in Kentucky. Just yesterday, another 525 coal miners employed at 3 eastern Kentucky mines operated by the James River Coal Company were given pink slips. My heart goes out to these miners and to their families, and I have met some of these people. And they're just trying to follow their ancestors by digging up a piece of the American dream in the Appalachian foothills. Last month, the Commonwealth of Kentucky released its statistics on the health of the coal industry for the second quarter of this year. And the story they tell is dire, even before yesterday's news of another 525 layoffs. Eastern Kentucky coal mines, facing the brunt of this president's regulatory overreach, shed another 851 jobs last quarter, leaving the total number of Kentuckians employed at the mines at just 12,342. That is the lowest number since Kentucky began keeping such statistics in 1927. Eastern Kentucky coal production is down a whopping 41.4% in just the last 2 years. And with those reductions, we have lost over 5,700 mining jobs. And now, the new source performance standards will prohibit coal from even competing in the energy marketplace. Even though the final regulations have now been delayed a year due to industry and public opposition, as so often before, this administration has brushed those concerns aside and proceeded apace. The EPA even forecasts, given the regulatory environment, that there will be no new coal plants built after this year. Rather than phasing in rules to allow all types of fuel to adapt, these regulations on new and existing plants single out coal, stifling the promise of capture in its crib, a technology that could have provided the United States with a revolutionary technology on the magnitude of hydraulic fracturing that could have changed the course and shape of our economy, driven exports, and paid real benefits in terms of carbon emissions reductions. But instead, the United States will endure unilateral economic disarmament while our international competitors continue to pursue growth-oriented energy policies. Over the next few years, as these policies take hold, the rest of the country will be made aware of this disaster that is already taking place in Appalachia. Already, 1/5 of the nation's coal-fired power plants, 204 plants across 25 states, closed between 2009 and 2012. The rest will shutter prematurely in the years following implementation of the new source performance standards. 7 EPA regulations already proposed over the last 4 years are forecast to cost $16.7 billion annually once fully implemented. The new source performance standards will trump even that figure, constituting the largest energy tax of all time, implemented by regulatory fiat without the consent of the people's elected representatives in Congress. That's because this president's own party couldn't enact this radical environmental agenda through cap and trade in the first 2 years of this president's administration. The loss of 69,000 megawatts of coal-fired power will ripple through the economy, costing an estimated 887,000 jobs in the mining, utility, shipping, and manufacturing sectors per year. The president had planned to spur growth in manufacturing and low energy costs at home, coupled with rising wages in countries like China and India, promised to restore our competitive advantage in manufacturing. But the new source performance standards will quickly put an end to those prospects. Mr. Speaker, the United States has 250 years' worth of coal reserves at current consumption rates that could, if utilized, provide affordable energy and high-tech manufacturing feedstocks. But the President isn't interested in playing this ace up America's sleeve. Instead, he wants to stay the course on a disastrous energy rationing policy that has already put thousands in the unemployment lines in my neck of the woods in Kentucky and all throughout Central Appalachia, and will put hundreds of thousands of more hard-working Americans there in the years to come. So I urge the President to abandon these disastrous, job-killing policies and to come to Congress to work on a plan that will relieve energy costs for our families, put the American people back to work, and protect the environment. Otherwise, this week's announcement of these new source performance standards will demonstrate a willful denial of these ambitions and a ruthless attack on a centuries-old industry that has provided jobs and economic opportunity for thousands of Americans. And I want to end my comments this evening by telling a story that illustrates the human cost and the human dimension of this administration's war on coal. In the eastern edge of my district sits a small town of Campton, Kentucky, in Wolfe County, Kentucky. And when I was home during the August recess, I went there and had a town hall meeting to listen to the concerns of people who are struggling. And I met a young woman by the name of Sally. And she came up to me after the town hall meeting with tears welling up in her eyes. And she looked at me and she said, "My husband just lost his job in the coal mines. He's a coal miner. He lost his job because the Environmental Protection Agency would not issue a coal mining permit to his employer. And as a result, they had to lay off all of the coal miners, including my husband," is what this woman told me. And she said, "Here's the problem. My children need to go back to school. It's August, and it's time to go back to school, and they're growing up, and they don't have shoes. They've grown out of their shoes. And so I don't know what to do because we can't afford shoes. So I went ahead and bought them flip-flops so that they wouldn't be embarrassed to go back to school." Imagine that. Politicians and bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., putting this working family in Central Appalachia in that kind of economic distress so that they can't even afford shoes for their children. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, a supporter of this administration or not. It is fundamentally wrong. It is fundamentally immoral for the federal government to put working American families into economic distress. And so I call on my colleagues in Congress to stand firm and stand in opposition to this radical agenda which is destroying jobs, destroying opportunity, and destroying the American dream. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank our colleague for yielding back. I think you can see, Mr. Speaker, the passion that's coming to Washington to advocate on the part of the coal industry. We're not just talking about a black rock that's dug out of the ground. We're talking about lives. We're talking about American lives. We're talking about jobs and the ability to put food on the table, to put clothes on our children, to provide a manufacturing base so that Americans have somewhere to work, and to do what America knows how to do best: innovate and compete and solve problems. I'm proud now to turn over some time to another one of our colleagues, Representative Kevin Cramer from the great state of North Dakota.
Thank you very much. I thank my colleague and friend from Ohio for leading this important discussion on this very important and somewhat scary week. Mr. Speaker, I love the opportunity to tell the story of North Dakota. You know, a lot of people think of North Dakota these days as just an oil-producing state out there somewhere in the Wild West. And while we're the second leading producer of oil, and we're rather proud of how well we do it, long before that, even long before North Dakota was one of the 10 top producers of wind energy, long before that, North Dakota was producing electricity by burning coal. In fact, for decades, North Dakota has been generating electricity burning coal. In fact, at the current burn rate, there's an 800-year supply of lignite coal under our prairies. And prior to being elected to this great institution of the People's House, I was a public service commissioner for 10 years and carried the portfolio of coal mining in our state. I got to oversee the data collection, the pre-mine permitting, the permitting of the mine, the inspections of the mines, the releasing of the bond for the life of the mine. North Dakota companies mine over 30 million tons of coal every year, Mr. Speaker, generating about 5,000 megawatts of electricity, and currently we have about 120,000 acres under permit for coal mining in our state. It's very important to North Dakota, as it is to the rest of our nation. The lignite industry in North Dakota, a state of fewer than 700,000 citizens, employs more than 28,000 of those 700,000 people and has an annual economic impact in our little state of $3 billion and generates over $100 million of tax revenue to help fund the priorities of our state. To provide some perspective, Mr. Speaker, on the wage impact of the industry in North Dakota, 2 counties, Mercer and Oliver counties, are home to 3 coal mines and 5 generating plants. And they're 2 counties with the highest wages of any county in our state, and we have a state with very high wages. But those direct economic benefits are just a small part of our story. Because you see, 79% of North Dakota's lignite is used to generate electricity for over 2 million citizens in the upper Midwest. 13.5% is used to generate synthetic natural gas that is piped to over 400,000 homes in the East. And every time I have this opportunity to address the House, I like to tell a little piece of the story. You see, 7.5% of that coal is used to generate fertilizer for our #1 industry, agriculture. It's a great part of our culture. It's what I believe makes us very good at coal mining. It's those agricultural roots. Let's talk about electricity generation for a moment. It's under such attack today. No industry in America is more under attack today than this by this administration. We're home to 7 plants, as I said, owned by rural electric cooperatives, investor-owned utilities, and provides low-cost electricity to our region. And beyond the direct employment of the high-paying jobs in this industry, by the coal mines, the generation plants, the transmission companies, the utilities, the distribution companies, our low-cost coal provides the region with some of the cheapest utility rates in the country. In fact, just today I printed out the most recent Electric Power Monthly report on the average retail price of electricity by state year-to-date, and North Dakota and the state of Washington have the lowest retail prices of any state in the country. Can you imagine what a tremendous advantage that is in the global marketplace when you're trying to attract other industries? As my colleague from Kentucky talked about, the opportunity for manufacturing in other industries. Now, we're also home to the Great Plains Synfuels plant, which takes our coal and turns it into gas that's used by homes and industry. And in the process of gasifying that coal, 50% of it is captured. The carbon is captured and then shipped via pipeline to Saskatchewan for tertiary oil recovery. So we capture half of the carbon and then inject it into old oil wells and generate more oil from it. Long before carbon capture and sequestration was cool, North Dakota innovators saw it as a commercially viable byproduct of energy development. And all that's going to get squashed by these rules that we're hearing about this week. Another innovation of our coal is that we use the ash from the plants, a byproduct of the power plants. Instead of it being emitted out of the stacks, it's collected. And other entrepreneurial-minded individuals have discovered productive ways to utilize the coal ash instead of sending it to landfill. It creates a stronger, longer-lasting, and easier-to-work with concrete that's used in our nation's infrastructure, something that we need very badly these days. It's used in paint, insulation for stoves and refrigerators, ceiling and floor tiles, lumber, bricks and masonry, shingles and roofing materials. This is a byproduct, not a waste product. And it's certainly It's certainly safe. It's used to make better bridges like the new I-35 bridge in Minneapolis, better footings for wind towers. The many, many wind towers in North Dakota are actually attached to coal ash concrete. And their ability to sell this byproduct allows our utilities to keep electricity rates low for everyone. But you might ask, what of the environment? After all, it's the air, land, and water that concerns the magnitude of rules and regulations coming out they're coming at our industries with such a zeal out of this administration. I love talking about our environment in North Dakota. I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, and to our colleagues that very few places on earth are cleaner and greener than the state of North Dakota. With regard to our air, you might assume that a state with 7 power plants would have dirty air, but no, we're one of very few states that meet all ambient air quality standards as prescribed by the EPA. We're very proud of that. Oh, and by the way, remember those 2 counties, Mercer and Oliver, with the 5 power plants and the 3 coal mines? Once again this year, they received an A grade from the American Lung Association for their clean air in their annual report for 2012. But perhaps the area I'm most proud of is the reclamation of our mined lands. Before the federal government passed the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, the state of North Dakota passed its own reclamation laws, which were stricter, higher standards. We return our land to pre-mining use. I wish every member of Congress could come to North Dakota. I wish our president could come to North Dakota and see how good America could be and see how we reclaim our land, because we love our land. We're farmers and ranchers. Our mines take great pride in and invest vast resources in protecting our environment, their environment. Our companies have won many awards for stewardship. And you see, coal miners and utility company employees not only enjoy high-paying jobs, but they live there. They breathe the air. They drink the water. They farm the land. They're not just farmers and engineers. They're accountants, machinery operators, environmental scientists, rangeland biologists, truck drivers. The care of our natural resources is more important to us than it is to the EPA, quite honestly. And we do it quite well. We're a place made up of people who have proven for centuries you don't have to compromise quality of life for a high standard of living. We are an all-of-the-above state, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I'm proud to be here with you, my colleague from Ohio, Mr. Johnson, and to tell the story one more time about the importance of this industry. And if a war on coal is what's being waged, then we better be armed for the war, because it's worth fighting for. It's for our future. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back, and the point that you just made and that our colleague from Kentucky made. It's not simply a war on coal. It's a war on American jobs. It's a war on the American way of life. We have to stand. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud now to yield some time to another one of our colleagues who no one in the House knows more about the impacts of the coal industry to the economy of her state, her region, than does our colleague from West Virginia, Representative Shelley Moore Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Johnson. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Ohio for having this special order to talk about coal, to talk about energy, to talk about jobs, to talk about quality of life in our states, North Dakota, Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia. West Virginia is the second largest coal-producing state in the country, and it is part of who we are and has been for many, many years. And living in West Virginia and being home as we were in August, there's a lot of pessimism in the entire state. It's not just about coal. If you're a coal miner or directly involved, it's the whole community, it's the whole area, it's the whole region. And there's a feeling that the president, through his policies, has really picked winners and losers in this country. And our region is going to lose. And the job issue, we're seeing hundreds of jobs. We just had a mine close last week or week before, 250 miners. But then that's the transportation, the truck driver, the stop-and-go owner, the oil and gas marketer, the electrician, the pipes, all the things, that equipment manufacturers, everything. It's not just about those 250 jobs. It's a multiplying effect in our region of West Virginia. The abundance of coal in West Virginia and nationwide gives us real potential. You know, we get criticized. Oh, you're fighting an old fight. That fight's, you know, it's no longer part of the future. We got to make it a part of the future because it makes good sense. Producing more domestic energy means reliable. It means affordable supply of power and energy. I think about a state like mine, that folks who live on fixed incomes, a lot of older folks. When it comes to the end of the month and they see their electric bill, they're having trouble now meeting that challenge of paying for that, making choices of medicine or food or you know, food for their pets or whatever's important to them because of the high cost now. That's just going to go up and up and up if we disenfranchise ourselves in this country of our most abundant resource, and that being coal. Let's talk about the tax revenues that are lost to all the counties, the school systems in our state. If you don't have the tax revenues in our state that coal produces and energy produces, whether it's natural gas, we all got a lot of natural gas in our states too. We're blessed with that. But if we don't have the the tax revenues there, this just wounds county commissioners, wounds county boards of education. And that to me is one of the, not unintended, but one of the consequences that never gets talked about, that really will harm a way of life, a future for the children. So let's talk about the potential. We've been exporting a lot of coal. And importing, you know, and by doing that, we create jobs because we're exporting our coal. And I see nothing wrong with exporting coal to our allies because exporting energy means we're producing the resource. Earlier this year, Bloomberg News reported that Germany will start up more coal-fired power stations this year than at any time in the past 20 years. And when we think about Germany, we think about somebody who's environmentally conscious. They have a very healthy green party over there. They're very considered to be very cutting edge when it comes to conservation and clean energy. Yet they're building more coal-fired power plants in their country than they have over the last 25 years. During the first campaign, the president said that if you build a coal-fired power plant, we will bankrupt you. We've all seen the tape. And on Friday, that's what his statement's going to be from the EPA. It will be impossible to build a new coal-fired power plant, or it will bankrupt you if you try to do it. And one of his major advisors has said that a war on coal is exactly what this country needs. How can you say a war on an industry that employs thousands of people in the heartland of our country and thousands more in ancillary businesses? And it's a way of life. It's domestic energy. The administration supports this attack on hardworking people in an industry that provides good jobs and back to the affordable energy, not just for our folks on fixed incomes, but for our manufacturers, our small businesses. Cheaper, affordable energy is going to create jobs in other industries as well, and it has. You don't have to look too far to see the administration's attack on coal. We know about the EPA's unprecedented action of retroactively pulling a validly issued clean water permit. That was shocking on the face of it. They said, oh, we've done that before. Well, when you look at it, maybe once, maybe a long time ago. But this was a 10-year process, millions of dollars to get this permit that was yanked out from under this company. And who's going to invest in an industry when you're in danger of losing a permit retroactively after you've jumped through all the hoops, met all the standards, worked with the Corps, done all the things that you're supposed to do, and still this administration will come back and take your permit back. The administration has attacked the use of coal. Recent figures say that 295 coal units of 33 states are closing, and they're closing in our states, and we can already see it. And it's a source of great concern. In 2012, the EPA proposed a new source performance standard. They kind of backed off from it, but it would place coal plants and large natural gas plants under the same standard for carbon dioxide emissions, 1,000 pounds per megawatt hour. Well, what we're hearing early reports is they're going to create two standards. But the standard for coal is going to be unmeetable because the carbon capture and sequestration, the technology's not there. This is where I think if we look at the future, where the real future lies for our abundant resource, coal. But earlier this year, they scrapped the 2012 proposal. And the President instructed revised standards. But basically what we're going to see on Friday is it's the same thing. It's like Groundhog Day. Same thing, same rhetoric, same standards, same results. Lost jobs, higher utility costs, seniors and others on fixed incomes worried about how they're going to heat their homes or cool them in the hot summers. All these things are very, very daunting in my state of West Virginia. The truth is that without new performance standards, carbon dioxide emission generation in the United States are falling. Let's talk about the rest of the world. At the same time, global emissions have increased by 1.4%. So if the administration wants to impose carbon dioxide standards and regulations that will harm the American economy, then at a minimum it should act as part of an agreement with other countries. The Senate unanimously took that position in 1997 when it passed a resolution sponsored by then Senator Robert C. Byrd from West Virginia and current Obama Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, which said that the United States should ratify the Kyoto Treaty unless specific standards were agreed upon to limit emissions by developing countries. The Byrd-Hagel principle was common sense in 1997, and it remains so today. For that reason, I will be introducing legislation that would delay the implementation of the new source rules for coal plants unless other countries that account for 80% of the total non-USA carbon dioxide emission standards enact those standards so that we are not disadvantaging our workers, our jobs, our economy, our seniors, our folks who have manufacturing jobs and small businesses. The American people want us to work together. They really do. I mean, we hear that when we're out. It's Republicans, Democrats, independents, non-parties, old, young, educated, less educated, blue-collar, white-collar. They want us to work together. They want common-sense policies. They want an energy policy that creates jobs, that includes everything, that is an all-of-the-above energy plan. And that's what we want, and that's what we're fighting for. The President stood up here in January and said he was for all of the above energy. On Friday, he's going to say all of the above except coal, which is abundant in the heartland of America. So with that, I would urge my colleagues on the floor tonight to think about coal and how it I think, and I know I'm running short on my time, but I want to say that some states do not realize what their portfolio is in coal. So I looked up Florida. 22% of the energy that is the power generation in Florida, 22% of that is coal. Yet you hear many of the Florida delegation just right on board with the climate change philosophy of this president. Their renewable portfolio in the United States is slightly over 2%. The renewable portfolio in the state of West Virginia, who has some of the most abundant resources in the country, is at least twice that. So it goes back to, actually, do what you say and say what you do. And so I think that we need to work with our colleagues, educate our colleagues about what a great role coal plays across this country. Even if you don't mine it in your region, you're using it, you're powering it. Your seniors in Florida are using it to cool themselves down on a hot summer day. And so with that, I would say I look forward with dread on Friday to see what the new EPA administrator has come forward with, because I feel that it's going to pick winners and losers in this country, and that our region, and really our own domestic energy supply, and in some ways our domestic energy security, is going to be disadvantaged. And that, to me, in a time of high unemployment, in a time of more part-time jobs being created than full-time, we're going to turn our back on an industry that looks to the future to do it better, to do it cleaner, to do it more efficiently, to do it with higher technology, to do it with better research, to do it with education, to employ the next generation in an industry that's been part of the backbone of this country and certainly of our region. So with that, I yield back and thank the gentleman for having me.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding back, and certainly we can see the passion that she brings to the table as well. You know, I think one of the things that is important for the American people to understand is this notion of energy independence and security. We hear those terms a lot, but not everybody understands what those terms really mean and how it affects them, their families, their future. And I think there's some lessons that can be learned about America's past that would help us understand how energy independence and security might affect our future. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and I think to do so, I want to set the stage just a little bit by taking us back to March of 2011, when right here in this chamber, the Prime Minister of Australia addressed a joint session of Congress. She came to this chamber and she started her speech off by saying, you know, I remember being a young girl, sitting on my living room floor watching Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin land on the moon, thinking to myself, wow, those Americans can do anything. She went on to talk about America's and Australia's engagement in world issues, how America stood alongside of and often in front of Australia during World War II. At the end of her speech, she summarized by saying, you know, I'm not that young girl anymore. Today I'm the Prime Minister of our country. And yet still today I believe that Americans can do anything. And when she said that phrase the second time, this notion that Americans can do anything, you could have almost heard a pin drop in this chamber. There were, as members from the Senate, from the President's cabinet, dignitaries, military leaders, members of the House, sort of took a collective cleansing breath, sucking that air in, that notion that Americans can do anything. It's not like we don't believe it. It's certainly not that we haven't proven it, but we don't hear it these days. And we're certainly not teaching it to future generations the way we once did. You see, when President Kennedy launched us on that great vision to put a man on the moon in 10 years, he engaged every fabric of our society, our scientific community, our technological community, our academic community, our military, our economic will, our political will. And he said before the American people, he said, we're not doing these things because they're easy. In fact, we're doing these things because they're hard. And because by doing these things, we're going to invent and innovate and discover things that we might not have discovered otherwise. I'm paraphrasing what President Kennedy said, but that was the message that he delivered to the American people. And he did such a good job of rallying the American people around this vision of American exceptionalism in that day that we didn't make it to the moon in 10 years. We actually made it in 8. And we saw one of the most expansive and innovative periods in American history unfold right before our very eyes. And we still see the benefits of that era today. the cell phones that we carry around, the flat screen TVs that we watch, the computers that we use, the GPS systems that navigate us from place to place, even medical technology, communicating technologies. So much innovation came out of that period of time. We have an opportunity in America to harness that great American character of innovation, just like President Kennedy did, around an idea of energy independence and security. As my colleague from West Virginia just pointed out, the President stood in this chamber and said that back in January. He advocated in his words for an all-of-the-above energy policy, one that includes all forms of energy. And yet his policies continue to do right the opposite, particularly where the coal industry is concerned. What if we had a national energy policy that went something like this? Starting today, America is setting a goal to become energy independent and secure in America by the year 2020. And we're going to harvest the vast oil and gas resources that we have. Experts say we have more of that resource now than any nation on the planet. We're going to expand our nuclear footprint. It's the cleanest form of energy on the planet. We're going to invest in and advocate for alternative forms of energy like wind and solar, biofuels, hydro, but we're going to let the market drive those innovations. And yes, we're going to continue to mine and use the vast coal resources we have, because we've got enough coal in this country to fuel our energy needs for generations. It's the most affordable, most reliable form of energy that we know. But we're not going to stop there. We're going to have a regulatory process that requires that regulatory agencies like the EPA become partners in progress with America's industries and businesses. Rather than just throwing up barriers and saying no. If there's a reason to say no for public health or public safety reasons, then say no, but don't let no be the final answer. The American people have an expectation that their tax dollars are going to be used to move America forward, not to put on the brakes, kill jobs, ruin families, and make America less competitive in future generations. I believe if we had that kind of energy vision, we would once again see America's innovative wheels begin to turn. We would see young people lining up to get into technical programs and college programs to prepare them for careers in energy development, domestic energy development. We would see millions of jobs created. We would see industries crop up. We would see a resurgence in manufacturing. We would see America go back to work. And it would put in play the American dream once again for millions of Americans, millions of middle-class Americans who have begun to think that perhaps the American dream doesn't apply to them anymore. The American dream is still alive and well in our country, and all we have to do is plug in to the type of American exceptionalism that put us on the moon and go after a real energy independence and security policy that harvests our coal, uses the natural resources that we have, and puts Americans back in charge of their own destiny. I want to go a little bit into detail here on some of the comments that our my former colleague, or my colleague from West Virginia and Kentucky and North Dakota made just a few minutes ago. We know that coal-fired power plants like the Cardinal, Ohio, and Samus plants, both of which are in my district, can be built with scrubbers in place so that coal can be used in a very environmentally safe way. The President and his administration have started this war on coal that focuses on both the mining of coal and the use of coal in power plants. This week, the EPA is expected to issue a rule on new power plants that will almost certainly ensure that under existing technology, no new coal-fired power plant will be built in America. The new rule will require technology called carbon sequestration and storage, and it's not commercially available, nor commercially viable. My friend from West Virginia, David McKinley, has legislation that says that the EPA can't issue a rule that requires technology that isn't commercially viable. I hope we'll consider that legislation in the House for two reasons. I think the American people have an expectation that people that make regulations that affect the economy, that affect the jobs, that affect the livelihood of Americans all over this country, that those rules are based on scientific fact and that they are technologically viable. That's not what we're seeing out of the EPA today. And number two, I think it is absolutely irresponsible for the federal government to essentially ban, a form of energy that has fueled America's energy needs for generations and can for future generations. Remember what I said earlier. 800,000 jobs are produced either directly or indirectly across our country by the coal industry. Before long, grid reliability will be in question, and rolling blackouts will be the norm again if we don't have coal power as part of our energy mix. I come from a background in information technology, and I can tell you that much of our technology is designed to operate on stable, reliable power. And blackouts and brownouts and dipped power grid will put great stress on our technological resources. Don't take my word for it. Ask the experts. Not to mention that energy costs are going to rise. People will lose their jobs, and hardworking families will be forced to pay higher utility rates. Sadly, this new rule on power plants is just the beginning. Next year, the EPA is expected to release a new rule regulating existing coal-fired power plants. Now, if that rule is anything like the rule coming out this week, coal-fired power plants could go extinct in just a few years. We're already seeing the effects of the EPA's crusade against coal. In my district alone, one coal-fired power plant is already closed, leaving over 100 people without jobs. Furthermore, there are 6 other coal-fired power plants in my district, and if the EPA issues that unworkable rule next year, thousands in my district could be without jobs. Now, if the President's war on coal simply stopped here, the coal industry and the people employed either directly or indirectly by the coal industry might be okay. However, the EPA rules are just the tip of the iceberg, because the rest of the administration is also actively trying to shut down coal producers with a series of new rules. First, at the Department of the Interior, the administration has been trying to rewrite the 2008 stream buffer zone rule for nearly 5 years now. This rewriting of the rule has been disaster from the beginning, as the administration has wasted nearly 10 million taxpayer dollars and 5 years of our time on this environmentalist dream. It might be a dream of theirs, but it's going to be a nightmare for the coal industry and the families across this country that are dependent upon it. We know that the preferred rule by the administration would cost thousands of jobs because the consultants they hired to do the analysis told us so. And it'll lead to coal production being cut by nearly half in America, but yet the administration appears unfazed and continues its efforts to rewrite the rule. That's why last year I introduced the Stop the War on Coal Act that would have stopped not only the rewrite of the stream buffer zone rule, but also the EPA's misguided attempts to regulate coal-fired power plants. My colleague from Colorado, Doug Lamborn, and I have reintroduced similar legislation this year, and I hope that the House will once again pass it and send a strong signal to the President to stop this rewrite. Next, let's look at the Department of Labor. The President's Department of Labor is actively writing a rule dealing with coal dust that could potentially shut down totally underground mining. The rule is so unworkable and unreasonable that it's even been said that coal miners wearing full oxygen masks and tanks would not be in compliance with the rule. Think about that. Coal miners that would be breathing in pure oxygen still be in violation of this new rule. Now, I'm not sure how a coal company could continue with a rule like that, and that's why we've been fighting against the implementation of this rule, called the coal dust rule, as well. But we and the American people should not be surprised by the President's actions, nor the actions of his administration against the coal industry since he came into office. As our colleague from West Virginia pointed out, he told us back before he was first elected that his anti-coal policies would cause electricity prices to skyrocket and that it would bankrupt the utility company if it wanted to build a new coal-fired power plant in America. It might have taken him almost 5 years to deliver on those promises, but we're about to see him issue rules that will cause energy prices to skyrocket, make it impossible to build a coal-fired power plant, and kill thousands of jobs across the country. However, as we have seen tonight, there is a strong will here in the House of Representatives to stand up and fight back against the President's policies. So here's the message. We will not roll over, because the future of our economy and the livelihoods of our constituents, our children, and our grandchildren, future generations, are on the line. We will continue to fight through the appropriations process. We will continue to work hard to educate the public on these destructive policies until the President backs down. You know, I want to share one final story before I yield back. You know, I wasn't born into the coal production industry. I didn't grow up knowing a lot about coal production, but I sure learned a lot about coal consumption. I spoke to the Ohio Association of Rural Electric Co-ops about a month ago, and I shared with them that as a small boy, I was the utilities manager at a rural utility co-op. Now, they looked at me like some of you are looking at me, cocked their head kind of sideways and said, now, how can that be? How can a young boy be the director of a utility co-op? You see, on that rural farm where we worked, we had no indoor plumbing, and my grandmother heated and cooked on a big black round pot-bellied stove. My job as a young boy, before I went to bed each night, was to make sure that the coal bucket was full on the back porch, so that when my granddad got up at 4:30 in the morning to fire up that stove so that Grandma could get up and start breakfast, it was there. It was also my job to bring in a cistern of water from the outside pump so she didn't have to go outside and get it. So in a very real sense, I was the utilities manager for that farm. I provided the fuel and ensured that the fuel was there to heat, to cook, and provided the water. Folks, that's the character that America was built on. That's what hardworking people along Appalachia, Ohio, they dreamed of a future for their children and their grandchildren because they lived that kind of character. They still live it today. I want to thank my colleagues for coming tonight and join me in this effort to stop the administration's war on the coal industry. And, Mr. Speaker, with that, I yield back the balance of my time.